I don't remember being taken care of for a mere $300,000.
Despite having paid the entire cost of the condo for my eldest son David and his wife Barbara, it's Barbara who insults me. After my husband passed away, when the children were young, raising them alone was tough. 30 years ago, the world was facing a recession. Even though dual-income families were becoming common, the only option for women after childbirth were part-time jobs. Full-time employment was hard to come by. Despite struggling financially and finally buying David and Barbara a condo, Barbara is anything but grateful. She even goes so far as to insult me. Unable to hold back anymore, I said to David, "Don't you have anything to say about the terrible things being said to me?"
Just stop the payments.
He seemed unconcerned. Something inside me snapped with pleasure.
I said, and I stopped all the payments I'd been taking care of.
My name is Patricia Smith. I'm 53 and raised 2 boys on my own. Married at 20, had my eldest son David at 22, and 3 years later, my second son Charles was born. My husband was kind and family-oriented. We were happy back then. He worked for a small to medium-sized company, not earning much. But as a housewife, I managed by finding the cheapest groceries in ads. Before payday, it was all about stretching the budget. On payday, steak was on the menu. A clear reflection of our financial situation at the time. When Charles turned 3 and we were talking about wanting a girl, my husband died in a traffic accident. We hadn't taken out life insurance, so our family's income stopped abruptly, plunging us into hardship. Our savings for the third child's birth expenses ran out quickly, and I worked day and night. At that time, dual-income families were just becoming as common as housewives, but jobs were mainly part-time and full-time work for women after childbirth was rare. I earned $7 an hour during the day and $9 at night. There were better-paying jobs in night restaurants, but I couldn't bear the thought of dealing with drunk customers while raising 2 boys in elementary school. As a part-timer, I had no bonuses or extra income. Every month, even if I managed to earn enough for our expenses, any unexpected costs were a struggle. I could buy things for David, but not for Charles. That led to Charles being bullied at school, and even David was mocked. Desperate to increase my income, I opened the computer my husband had bought and started looking for work I could do in my spare time.
Maybe I can do this in my spare time. Affiliate marketing? Maybe I can do this in my spare time.
I started a blog titled Single Mother Struggles in Raising Children and casually posted product ads with links. That alone generated income, earning a few $100s more each month. My side hustle surprisingly took off. Maybe I had a talent for writing, or perhaps it was the blog's title. But my blog quickly climbed to the top of the popularity rankings. The amount I was making monthly was astonishing. When magazines and online articles started featuring me, I even began getting invitations to speak at conferences. Without realizing it, I became known as the Queen of Affiliate Marketing. I quit my day and night part-time jobs, made affiliate marketing my main job, and started hosting seminars and workshops. My income skyrocketed, allowing me to live a life where the past struggles seemed like a lie. I began buying anything for my kids, as they had also endured much. However, this disrupted our family's balance. From a life of frugality to one without financial worries, David began to live extravagantly. He didn't make it to his 3rd year of high school, repeating his sophomore year before dropping out. He hung out with other dropouts, venturing into the night and deepening friendships with the wrong crowd. Looking back, I regret being such a foolish mother. I got carried away by escaping a life of hardship and basked in the praise and attention from my speaking engagements.
I'll be away for a while for a lecture, so use this to buy and eat whatever you like.
Being called teacher by those around me and receiving applause from dozens, sometimes over 100 people, as I shared my success story in blogging and affiliate marketing. The busyness was the same as juggling multiple part-time jobs, but the fulfillment was incomparable. I couldn't be there for my sons during their crucial teenage years, giving David whatever amount of money he asked for. When he started getting picked up by the police repeatedly.
Mom, you can't just give David money so easily. He's being used by his friends.
Charles would warn me. Unlike David, Charles didn't fall into delinquency and spent his student years responsibly. After experiencing hardship due to poverty, I began to despise and distance myself from those who discriminated or harassed, raising my children to be kind and have a strong sense of justice. That's why David and Charles didn't get along. Didn't get along well.
I think it would be better to get David a proper job.
This was said to me when David had passed his 20s. 3 years had gone by since he dropped out of high school and he couldn't stick to any part-time job. Even his younger brother was worried, watching David call helping bad friends as an excuse for hanging out. I pulled some strings with an acquaintance to get David a job at a publishing house, but that didn't last long either. Repeated, unauthorized tardiness and absences led to his dismissal. Being fired from the publishing house of a friend who had helped publish my blog, and success story pained me with David's selfishness. I apologized on behalf of my adult son to the employees of the publishing house who said, "We failed in our guidance," apologizing back. It was an uncomfortable situation that benefited no one, just a waste of time.
I don't like being told what to do by others. I want to do something on my own.
David said without addressing his lack of patience, and then spoke of starting his own business. The import company I funded for him, traveling to Italy, Paris, Australia, Hong Kong, ended up as a tourist trip, retreating with a huge loss.
I have many close friends, so I'm sure I'll be successful.
He said starting a network marketing business next. I bought pots and water purifiers for David's sake, but that too didn't last. And he even signed up Charles as a member without consent, worsening their relationship. Charles was unwittingly used to sell these products to his friends. And both Charles and I had to go around apologizing multiple times. Despite all this, David fell in love with Barbara, whom he met through this network business, and they decided to marry and work seriously. Thinking that marriage and having a family might instill some responsibility, I helped David again. Their new condo, I paid for the entire cost. They didn't have a wedding due to their unstable life after quitting network marketing. They wanted to open a wine bar in Manhattan, so I funded their startup. David is now over 30, married. He shouldn't always rely on his parents. Despite helping with jobs and startup funding, as he kept quitting, we opened the store as a corporation with both David and me as representatives. I pressed on him that this was his last chance, his final warning, and we went into a joint venture. But as expected, it didn't go well. David bragged about getting good wines cheaply through contacts from his import days, but it seemed like he was just holding nightly drinking parties with friends.
Patricia, why don't you bring some friends over for drinks sometimes?
When I occasionally visited a nearly passed out Barbara, she would brazenly ask,
Mom, you're an officer too. If you don't do something like sales, this place will go under. Listen.
David, drunk and laughing, sloppily left me speechless. As a parent, I tolerated David's irresponsible words, but Barbara's attitude only brought disgust.
I come from quite a good family, you know. My parents are wealthy. If you're ever in trouble with money, I can help.
Barbara would always say, holding an empty bottle of red wine. Having met Barbara's parents just once at a family meeting, they didn't seem affluent at all. And I only remember the intimidating presence of Barbara's brother, Richard.
Man, I always wanted a brother, so I'm happy about this.
David was oddly attached to Richard at that time. Months after opening the bar, we were recording tens of thousands of dollars in losses each month, and the startup funds I provided were depleted. Now I'm covering the monthly deficits, but neither David nor Barbara show any sense of urgency or anxiety. I finally reached my limit and consulted with my younger son, Charles. Charles had been avoiding David since the network business incident, but he took my concerns seriously.
I'll look into a few things. There's been something on my mind for a while.
A week later, I visited David's bar. The end of the month was near and the deadline for rent and utility payments was approaching. I needed to check the sales and cover any shortfall. It was 9 p.m., the busiest time for a wine bar, yet the only people inside were Richard and his friends, with David and Barbara drunkenly joining them at the table. How many times had I witnessed this disheartening scene in the months since opening? I sighed deeply and approached David.
David, if this continues, I'm gonna shut down the shop.
I said calmly.
Why are you making that scary face? If that's the case, Patricia should do some sales and bring in her acquaintances.
She said, causing discomfort with her tone.
You said you would work hard with David, but what's this behavior all about?
I didn't want to even speak to Barbara, but in this situation I couldn't avoid it. Every day they just drank with Richard's friends. What was their intention? I couldn't help but confront them. Though Barbara was too drunk to give a coherent answer, Richard spoke up instead.
What are you saying? You are a joint representative. Quitting would just damage your own reputation.
He said arrogantly, sitting back on the sofa showing no respect for an elder or a relative.
People who are poor don't know how to handle money. It's fine, we're spending it for you.
Barbara shockingly said, making me lose my composure. How can you say something so awful? I paid for the startup of the shop and even your condo, I blurted out, and always indulged their whims, feeling guilty for the hardships my children faced due to money when they were young. But Barbara's insults, despite me paying for their condo, were too much to bear. Then Barbara said,
I don't remember being taken care of for just $300,000 and turned away.
David, don't you have anything to say about the terrible things being said to me? I confronted David, who didn't even try to defend his mother, being insulted right in front of him.
Stop the payments then.
Something inside me snapped.
With pleasure, I said and left the bar.
As I exited, Barbara's voice loudly echoed, Go ahead and try if you can. A few days later, the month had changed and I was summoned to the bar by David and Barbara. They were probably being hounded for payment since I had stopped all the end-of-month payments.
I'll go with you, Charles said, joining me, which was reassuring.
We arrived at 1 p.m. for the discussion, choosing a time when that couple wouldn't be drinking. David, Barbara, and even Richard were there. Richard started the conversation first.
What? Did you bring a man as your bodyguard today? He said mockingly at the sight of Charles.
David explained to Richard, Oh, that's my brother.
And Richard nodded in understanding.
Their speech was clear, indicating they hadn't been drinking, which was a relief. However, it bothered me that while Barbara and Richard were seated on the sofa, David stood alone.
So what's your plan? Not paying rent or utilities?
Richard suddenly began, his feet slamming onto the table with an audacious attitude. His rudeness was infuriating.
This has nothing to do with you, I retorted in an argumentative tone.
No, it's not entirely unrelated. Let's proceed.
Charles interjected.
I'm Charles Smith, an attorney. Barbara Jones and Richard Brown, who claims to be your brother. I am suing you for fraud and embezzlement.
When Charles clearly and logically stated his intention, the three in front of us exchanged confused glances.
Charles, when did you become a lawyer?
At the time of the network business incident, Charles was still in high school. Since then, he hadn't had a proper conversation with his brother, so David was unaware of Charles' profession.
You haven't yet submitted your marriage registration with David Smith, but you live in the condo my mother bought with David and work in the storehouse.
And work in the store she funded. So it's considered a common law marriage.
Charles continued methodically, ignoring David's question.
What? You haven't submitted the marriage registration yet?
David was surprised by Charles's revelation and questioned Barbara, readjusting her poster from a slouch position. Well, that is...
Barbara stammered.
I had thought Charles's investigation was about this when he mentioned looking into something. But it seemed he had delved much deeper, speaking as if he had prepared for this moment. Additionally, you have had an intimate relationship with Richard Brown before moving in with David, and you live together, right?
Charles's next assertion shocked David, who interjected, Richard, your last name is Brown? It was a fact I was learning for the first time too, but David's naivety frustrated me.
You're still staying at Richard's house several times a week, which suggests a common law marriage with him too, potentially constituting bigamy. As Charles pressed Barbara, she became flustered and confronted Richard sitting next to her.
Wait, Richard? What's this about? You said deceiving David wouldn't be a crime? Barbara's panicked confession in front of me, and David revealed she was following Richard's instructions to deceive David, essentially admitting the crimes Charles accused her of. I was appalled.
You approached David for money, intentionally deceived him, and maintained a polygamous relationship. It looks like marriage fraud, too.
Charles pointed out calmly, not missing a beat of their reactions.
There was no escaping now.
Then Richard, who had been domineering until now, suddenly changed his tone. Wait, please wait, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He apologized repeatedly, stepping down from the sofa.
You may not have meant it, but you have been selling the expensive wines purchased by this bar on a personal website. That's embezzlement, and it's intentional and malicious. Charles had seen the bar's accounts that I had shown him. He had thoroughly investigated every detail.
Please don't sue me. I have other things to worry about.
Other things? I wondered, but Charles quickly clarified.
Other things? Oh, you mean the suspended sentence for a previous marriage fraud with Barbara? You got lucky with a suspended sentence after settling the first offense, but reoffending soon after will accumulate the sentences. A long prison term is your own responsibility.
So these two had been caught for the same crime before with someone else? As I was coming to terms with Charles' explanation...
What about me? Hey, what happens to me? Barbara the fraudster selfishly interjected.
Selfishly interjected, you're also on a suspended sentence, so it's the same. By the time it's completed, you'll be older than my mother, whose current age is 53. I'm 53 now, and she seemed to be in her early 30s. Is it even possible to get a sentence of over 20 years?
A reoffense during probation means a previous sentence of 5 years will be added to the current crime. With evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and bigamy, be prepared.
Charles explained, although I don't understand the details, it seemed severe. The two resigned themselves, falling silent. What? So I was a victim of deception?
Thank you. You saved me.
David naively and inappropriately thanked Charles, assuming his innocence.
We'll be pressing criminal charges against these two, but I'm also considering a civil lawsuit against David.
Charles coldly informed the jubilant David.
What's that? I don't understand complicated stuff.
David exclaimed in frustration. Charles mentioned suing David for neglecting his management duties in our joint venture, influenced by Brown, and for turning a blind eye to the expensive wines Brown had been diverting.
If David doesn't change, I might even press criminal charges for breach of trust. I remained silent as the three pleaded, "Please have mercy to Charles." Charles had heard bad rumors about Barbara Jones since the network business incident and had been aware of her existence.
While studying law in college and working part-time at a detective agency, Charles strategically sought connections to aid his investigations, aiming to pass the bar exam. After graduating, he continued his part-time job at the detective agency while persistently taking the bar exam, finally becoming a lawyer last year. Despite being a new attorney, he is respected for his investigative skills. His sense of justice, forged by unjust childhood bullying, has shaped him into a calm and assertive adult. Even though they are brothers, I can only sigh at the differences between him and David. The difference between him and his brother David is dark, a reminder of my shortcomings in parenting, though Charles has learned from these negative experiences. Years later, Charles hasn't sued David, Barbara, or Richard. In fact, he hasn't yet. He says there's time due to the statute of limitations for fraud. And with evidence ready, there is no rush. He's waiting to see if they genuinely reform. I'm not well versed in law, so it is unclear to me how this differs from a thread, but the three have drastically changed. Barbara now works in a nursing home, cutting her hair and nails and forgoing makeup. Richard is at a monastery, busy with children, busy with chores and cleaning as a novice. Naturally, they are probably afraid of being sued. David, the one I was most concerned about, has cut ties with Barbara and Richard and is running the wine bar alone. His introduction to quality wine import seems valid. Inspired by Charles, he's now earnestly managing the business. The location I chose for the bar is prime. While not bustling, it shouldn't incur huge losses if managed properly. It seems he's waking up, gradually gaining recognition for providing quality wine. He is diligently transferring the amount stated in Charles's written agreement to me each month. If I'm convinced of his genuine change, I might use the story of the wine bar's trials for a book and its release party.